Hey there. It is so good to have you with me today. We are very classically a small group today because it seems that there's not a lot of people who are really interested in understanding how the evolution of iridology has led to so much conflicting information out there. I think it's an important topic, and that is why we are covering it today. We're going to look at what a Jensenian iridologist would have said and what a constitutional iridologist would say, and we're going to build on that foundation as we go through. We're going to dispel a whole bunch of myths as well. I would love it if you've got questions and comments, drop them in the chat box so that we can have a little conversation on the side. That would be so good. So let's just start with having you find that chat box and just chat a little hello message. Just say hi, just so we know that you know how to find that chat box. All right. So while you're doing that, just brief introduction. In case you're new to me, my name is Judith Cobb. I am a level 3 certified iridology instructor. I've been an iridologist for over 4 decades, and I am affiliated with the International Iridology Practitioners Association. They require that all iridologists and all instructors update their education every 2 years. So I've just got my last 2 badges on the screen for both iridologist and instructor. I'm one of only 9 level 3 instructors in the world to date. I am also a master herbalist and a holistic nutrition professional, and I'm affiliated with these organizations as a professional member. What I love about these organizations and IPA is, again, that we have to submit updating. We have to do our CEUs and submit that to stay active at the professional level. I think it's so important to keep the education going, to always be learning something that's going to help in the practice of what you're doing in your clinic. So let's dive right in. When we look at the history of iridology, it started out thousands of years ago in Egypt, India, China, and Greece. We've got documentation from those places that suggests they knew to look at the eyes. We don't know exactly what they saw, what they were looking for, how they interpreted it, but we know that that is where the ancient root of this sits. Think about science in general. It used to be thought that the earth was flat. We now know something different, right? Some people still believe the earth is flat for whatever reason. They maybe haven't kept up with research, or they just don't want to know, right? They believed that it was flat when they were little, therefore it must still be flat now. And they're not willing to look at new information. Not all that new, really, right? So we know that science evolves. Science is the art of asking questions. I think many of us are tired of hearing that just follow the science, right? Because that's has earned a bad reputation. The fact of the matter is, science is the art of asking questions and investigating and coming up with new information and then questioning that new information, right? Science doesn't hit dead ends. It's always asking what comes next. What comes next? What comes next? And because of that, as iridologists, we also need to do the same. We always need to ask, is this information really accurate? Is there something that is more accurate? So important. Let's start with the myth that is out there. This is the Ignaz von Petschle story. You've probably heard it. Ignaz was an 11-year-old boy. He lived in Budapest, Hungary in the 1800s. This story has got so many iterations. Probably the most common one is that he caught or trapped an owl. The owl had a broken leg or wing. And as Ignaz got this bird home and was nursing it back to health, what he noticed is that the bird had a little black line in its iris. And as the bird was nursed back to health, that black line disappeared. Well, this is an 11-year-old boy. He had no way of documenting what he saw. And I'm not going to debate the veracity of what he saw, because it really is likely not something that would happen. We have all these bird sanctuaries where injured birds are taken in to be nursed back to health and then rehabilitated so they can go back into the wild, right? Wouldn't a veterinarian or a vet tech working in one of those facilities have seen this at some point in time with some of the birds that they've worked with? No one's ever documented it. So we need to take the owl story and put it aside. We also know that an owl's iris is a very different structure from a human iris, so we cannot extrapolate from an owl to a human. It just doesn't work. But what we love about Ignaz really isn't that he has the owl story. What we love is that he went on to become a medical doctor. And he was so fascinated by the eyes that he started drawing pictures of what his patients' eyes looked like and recording their stories, and began to correlate the stories to things he was seeing in the eyes. And he was one of the first people to begin developing what we would consider a modern iridology map. So regardless of what happened with the bird, the fact is he really did a great job of getting things started, right? And we appreciate him for that. His uncle said this about him. August von Petschle recognized years later that Ignaz was looking at an owl's eye and not that of a human. He did not have proper equipment to prove what had been recorded in the stories. It's time to move forward. And I agree. Now, some of the things that were challenging with Ignaz, he started out where many of us start. He started with a 2-power magnifying glass. That's a challenge. That's not giving you a lot of detail, but it was a start. It's what they had, right? He was puzzled because he would have people that had the same symptoms, but their eyes didn't have the same markings. Or he'd have people with the same eyes, but they didn't have the same symptoms, the same eye markings, but they didn't have the same symptoms. He couldn't understand that. Now what we understand is that the irides show us genetic potential. They show us what this body is capable of. And as we understand that, we can understand the symptoms the client has on a much deeper level. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? That the eyes are genetically set and we can use that information to help us understand where we need to go with this client and why they've got the problems they've got. Pastor Neil Liljequist in Stockholm, Sweden, about the same time that Ignaz was working, he correctly correlated the density of the fiber to resilience and overall resistance to disease. So an iris that looks like this, where we've got lots of threads, most of them radiating out really nicely, really high thread count, if you will. This is someone who genetically is more predisposed to having a robust resilience. That doesn't mean they're always going to be well, because often I find that people with this kind of an eye structure start out really strong and they figure they can do anything they want to their precious body. And eventually they break it down. You can drive a Rolls Royce into the ground, right? Pastor Nils Liljequist said that someone like this would have less resilience. They would have a harder time fighting off disease and infection. And we know that these are the people that need to work harder to stay well. They understand that they need to figure out what their health rules are, and they need to live within those parameters. Pastor Liljequist felt that the eyes would change due to toxic exposure, so that he felt that if you had a lot of medications, which there were some back then, that could build up toxicity and it would change the color of your eyes. It would deposit pigment in the eyes. We now know this is not true. We now know that any of these extra colors in the eyes are genetically set, and that we may lay more color down, more pigments down in the eyes, just as we do in our skin as we get older, right? We often end up with age spots or liver spots in our skin as we get older. That is genetically set, and it tells us some things that may be going on in the body, but we are not going to reverse this, and it's not due to toxicity. So we now understand that melanin is responsible for color and pigments, and the color and the pigments are not the result of toxic exposure. Now, how many of you have heard that you've seen things on social media posts where they would say to someone who had a lot of yellow color in their eyes, "Oh, you've got a lot of sulfur drugs. You must have taken a lot of sulfur drugs." Or you've got a brown patch in your eye like this. "Oh, your liver is really, really toxic." Have you heard that? If you have, give me a heard that in the comments box. We just need to work so hard to dispel these myths, right? It's just insane how these myths will not go away. Pastor Emmanuel Falca, you'll notice that many of these early researchers were pastors. They often also became medical doctors. He started mapping the iris, and he started to lay the foundation of a map, again, for others to build on. We've got all these people doing research through Europe, mostly Germany, Hungary, places like that, but they're not talking to each other. They don't have the internet to be sharing notes and findings, right? Emmanuel Falca taught iridology, and there's an institute in Germany that is named after him. It's called the Falca Institute. In Germany, it's one of the few countries where iridology is a regulated industry. You have to be a medical doctor or a heilpraktor in order to use iridology in Germany. That in and of itself suggests that there is some validity to this, and we're grateful that our North American doctors have not caught on to this, because they would abscond with iridology and we would have it removed from our ability to practice. Rudolf Schnabel, he, again, in Germany, right? All the good research is happening there. He researched pigment. So why did some eyes have yellow or orange or brown or reds in the iris? And he also researched pupil tonus, so size and shape. We like to think all pupils are round. They are not. And the shape and the size of the pupil gives us more information. He was also one of the first to use a microscope to examine the iris. So he was getting more than a 2-power magnification. He said this very specifically. Rudolf Schnabel said this: "It was no easy task, and those who believe or would like to believe that handling iridoscopy or iridology can be learned within a few weeks or even days are mistaken and do a disservice to a good cause." I totally agree with that. And that's one of the reasons why when I teach iridology, I will never do it as a 5-day intensive. That is not enough time to practice it, to learn it, to understand it. My course is one where we meet once a week for 2.25 to 2.5 hours, and we meet 20 times. And then there's extra opportunities for mentoring and for one-on-one sessions with me to understand what you're learning better. And then there's ongoing mentoring even after you've certified. So I agree with Rudolf that learning iridology at a professional level, as opposed to a party game level, is not a quick thing. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes coaching. Joseph Angerer, again in Germany, right? He was a student of Schnabel's. He became a naturopath or a heilpraktor, and he was concerned that every person who seemed to be publishing information about iridology was using different words to describe the same thing. He really wanted everybody to just get together and figure out a common language, common verbiage here. He also knew that students were reading books and accepting the printed word about iridology before adequate research was completed. People were publishing their theories as if they were proven fact, and people were reading those things and taking those theories as if they were proven fact. And that's where we've run into a lot of trouble, is so many people have accepted those theories without the research, without the test. So Joseph himself, he refused to publish his work until it had been vetted and analyzed by his professional peers. He wanted to make sure that what he was publishing, what he was teaching was accurate, was the most accurate information they had at the time. Then we have Joseph Deck, another fellow from Germany. He was an iridology researcher. That was his main focus. He also pioneered iridology photography, and he taught iridology. So we've got all this beautiful stuff coming out of Germany, and we're not done with Germany yet. They were busy there. We've got Theodor Kriege. He said, he was also a student of Angerer, Deck, and Schnabel. So he had the three of the early pioneers as his teachers. He felt that iridology was a brilliant assessment tool and that it was best used in conjunction with urine, hand analysis, finger analysis, tongue analysis, feces analysis. He felt that while iridology was sort of the king of the pile, that it was best to have other validators to go with it. He said, I hope that a later generation will succeed in establishing a single uniform system. In spite of zealous efforts, these have so far not succeeded, and they still have not succeeded. And here we are, 60 years later, still grappling with people creating their own systems, which is fine, but we need to have some unity here as well. Then, of course, we have the famous Dr. Bernard Jensen in California. We love Dr. Jensen. He took some of those early teachings in iridology and single-handedly kept iridology alive through the Cold War years when no information was coming out of Central Europe. He was keeping alive the theories, right? He was practicing the theoretical end of things and teaching that again as if it was gospel true, which we now know there were some flaws in that. We love him for the good he did, and we love him for keeping iridology alive. Then in the early 1980s, Harry Wolff, who was an American-born German, was fluent both in reading and speaking German, got his hands on one of the Joseph Deck books that was written in German. He started studying that and kind of blew his mind. And he decided that this was a good thing. So he then connected with Bill Cardona, who at the time was a registered pharmacist, and they started teaching 1- and 2-day workshops based on what they had learned from the Joseph Deck book. Eventually, Bill became a naturopath. He is a naturopath in Seattle, Washington right now. And Bill was also the instructor of iridology at Bastyr Naturopathic College in Seattle for many, many years. Bill was my constitutional teacher. My Jensenian teacher from 45 years ago had studied with Bernard, and I did Jensenian for about 10 years. And that was when I was about ready to throw in the towel and say game over. But that was when I learned about constitutional, connected with Bill, and studied with him. Best thing I've ever done. There are 3 primary styles of iridology practiced in North America. There's the Jensenian, as we've discussed, that was made popular by Bernard Jensen. There is the Rayid, or the emotional, or the behavioral iridology, and there's so many branches of that, and they're all doing things a little bit differently. And there's the constitutional. So on the physical assessment side, Jensenian and constitutional are the 2 physical ones. Let's do a quick comparison here. Jensenian, again, was originally taught by Bernard Jensen, and he taught that the iris changes when the body changes. So we would see healing lines show up in lacunae. We would see lacunae change size and shape. He taught that you could just sit and look at somebody's eyes and tell them what was wrong with them. And modern Jensenians that are taught by Ellentart Jensen have a much more constitutional leaning, but they're not quite all the way there yet. Now, this is really interesting because what Bernard didn't understand was the impact of photography on what we see in an eye. So that was one thing. The second point is interesting as well. I have a client who's in his mid-60s. He's been with me for about a year now, and he started 40 years ago into holistic health, and he was working with a local well-known herbalist iridologist who was a strict Jensenian at the time. And he had some good successes. My client enjoyed some good successes, got some good information, got some good training for himself working with this original Jensenian. Well, this client of mine was just in yesterday. He had a little crisis and we needed to get on top of it immediately. And so we've been working together, like I said, for nearly a year, and we've resolved many of his problems. He's feeling, as he says, I'm feeling like I'm 45 again, which is brilliant because he was feeling like he was 85 when I met him. And then he gave me the supreme compliment. He said, the way you do iridology is like nothing I've ever experienced. And he's had 3 or 4 iridologists in his lifetime. Is like nothing I've ever experienced. And the way you work because of your iridology is like nothing I've ever experienced. You are head and shoulders above anyone I've ever worked with. Now, that's an important thing to hear because that's what I teach my students to do. That's how I teach my students, and that's how I want them to come out at the end of their time with me, right? Rayet iridology, this is the emotional behavioral, teaches that the emotional traits are genetic and are revealed by markings in the irides. So what we would see as a physical marker, Rayet sees as an emotional marker, and we can intermarry the two of those. Readings can be done cold. Information gathered from irides may be combined with personal and family history information for interpretation. Founded by Denny Johnson, continued by Jim Burgess. There's a fellow, John Andrews in the UK. It has his own philosophies here. So there's lots of this going on, and it can be very, very helpful and can certainly add to the physical interpretation. Constitutional originated with Joseph Deck and some of those other early researchers as they started asking questions and pooling information. It is used by medical doctors in Italy, Germany, and Russia. I have a client who has immigrated from Russia, and she, interestingly, was a gynecologist in Russia, and her husband is a medical doctor. And she came to see me, that my client came to see me, not her husband. And I asked, is it okay if we do eye photos to do iridology? She said, you know, in Russia, that's the first thing we do with every patient. We look at their eyes to see what the eyes are telling us. And from there, we listen to the symptoms and then we move forward. That's exactly the way I teach my students to practice, is use the eyes, use the eyes. There are correlative medical studies being done. And so there is new research trickling out as these studies are being done. And these are studies that are, again, disproving some of the old Jensenian concepts and building on what we know about constitutional. Very exciting stuff coming out. Constitutional teaches us that the eyes are a reflection of the genetic structure of the body. So what did you inherit from your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents? That's what we see in the irides. The irides show us your genetic potentials for strengths and for weaknesses. Understanding that helps us understand why you've got symptoms and helps us then understand the pathway to help you reverse those symptoms and regain your health, right? Now, the sclera, on the other hand, is very dynamic. We have a lot of impact as to what the sclera looks like and what we're seeing in the sclera. So we want to keep that in mind as we're doing this. Constitutional iridology is the foundation of the dynamic iridology course. Constitutional iridology, and I love this because this is one of the first things that Bill Cardona taught me. Iridology does not give us the answers. It tells us what questions to ask. We practice that a lot in the dynamic iridology course as we get into where we start looking at eyes literally on the first lesson. But after that, as we're adding more layers, it's when we see these things, what are the kinds of problems we might see? What kinds of questions do you want to ask when you see this? If you've got this symptom and this eye marking, what questions do you want to ask, right? And we practice that. Other iris and sclera changes may continue to become visible with time, revealing areas that may need support. Background information is important. I would cross that out and say it is critical. We never do an iris analysis without information. That's what I consider the party game, and we don't play party games. All right, so let's look at this a little bit. All right. So I started learning iridology in 1979. Constitutional iridology had not yet reached Canada, and it was not even widespread in the US. So I had studied the Bernard Jensen work and I embraced it. By about the 5-year mark, I was getting frustrated. It wasn't doing what I was told it would do. And 10 years in, like I said earlier, ready to throw in the towel and just walk away from iridology. That is all phony baloney. It's no good. And here's why I felt that way. I've been taught that every one of these loops in an eye, and not all eyes have loops, but every one of these loops was a pathological problem that was happening right now. The problem that was happening right now. And so I would say to my client, your eyes say you've got a problem here and here, as we correlated these to the different organs that they represent. And my client would go, no, 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 no. And it's like, dang, why am I wrong all the time? And we were taught that when we saw lines like this inside one of these shapes, that meant healing had happened, or was happening. But here's the problem. We didn't have photos from before to see that there were no lines there. So how did we know these lines had magically appeared as the result of something great this client had done? The contrast here is that in constitutional iridology, we know that the fiber structure, these loops, the way the fibers are sitting in the eye, so much of that is all inherited. These are inherited from the generations that have gone before. So this shows us, for example, in this person, that she has an inherent potential towards hormone imbalance issues. And indeed, she does. She had PCOS when we first, early on in our relationship, when I first met her. And we did all the right dietary and herbal things, and she conceived. And then she actually went on to have four children, and then a big gap, but she had gained a lot of weight. She fell off the wagon, wasn't doing her eating properly, wasn't working out and taking care of her body well. So she gained a lot of weight. And that meant that when she finally got pregnant again, 8 years after her previous pregnancy, she went into gestational diabetes. And it wasn't until her doctors told her, you're going to be on insulin, that she went, oh, I've really done it to myself. And she got back on track, really watched her food intake, ate well while she was pregnant, and would go for a 20-minute walk after every meal. She totally regulated her blood sugars and went on to have a beautiful baby, number 5. She is still very heavy. That baby is coming up to 2 years, 18 months old now. And so, she's still got some work to do if she wants to avoid going into type 2 diabetes as she reaches her middle-aged years, right? Her body, her eyes are telling us that she's got that predisposition towards endocrine imbalances. And for her, it's PCOS, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, right? So when we see this and we see the symptoms and we hear the symptoms, we know exactly why she's doing that. And we know exactly what we need to do to help her fix the problem, right? I was taught as a Jensenian that seeing an iris like this, where the colors are all over the place, we've got some area where there's just some yellow, there's some really thick yellow, we've got some browns, we've got other things in here. I was taught that this was someone who was really toxic, that they needed to do a cleanse. And if they did a cleanse, their eyes would turn blue. I'd had teachers who had shown me before and after pictures, and they looked convincing. Lacunae in the eyes, or what Jensenians would call lesions, did look smaller. The eyes maybe did look bluer, but I didn't know anything about photographic technology back then. I didn't understand that things like changing the camera, changing the lighting. Back then we were shooting film and we were printing photos. I didn't know that even until 20 years ago when I started shooting digitally, I didn't know that even computer monitors, all of those things can change the appearance of the colors, especially. Lighting can change the size of the pupil, which will change the way the fibers look like they're sitting in the eye. So there's so many technical aspects that we need to be very, very careful that when we're taking photographs, when we're working off photos, we use the same camera on the same settings with the same amount of lighting, and just everything's got to be the same. The f-stop, the shutter speed, the focal, the source of the light. Is it LED or is it incandescent? It's all got to be the same if we think we're going to do a before and after comparison. So important. So as my frustration grew, because I wasn't seeing my clients' eyes change, I was putting them through their paces. They were doing cleanses left, right, and center, and their eyes were not changing. They were feeling better. Their symptoms were going away. They were feeling healthier and more resilient and more robust and more energetic, but their eyes weren't changing. So that was just about where I was ready to leave. But in constitutional, when I learned that and I looked at an eye like this, it was, oh, well, doesn't this give us some information? This particular image tells us that this person is predisposed or has tendencies towards liver and kidneys wanting to dominate how the body works. Also tells us this person functions primarily in the sympathetic nervous system responses, which means responds acutely to stress. We know that we've got this darker area. It's a darker brown in here, closer to the pupil, which tells us digestion is a genetically ongoing issue. This person may have learned that a long time ago. They may have learned that they shouldn't drink water with their meals or drink fluids with their meals. They may have learned that they need to take time and relax at mealtime and they need to chew their food thoroughly. And if they have that, is brilliant. Those are the right kinds of things to do. There are supplements we could add in that situation as well. If the person hasn't learned that, chances are at some point in time, they are going to have stomach and intestinal symptoms. And that is what the eyes are suggesting to us. Also, the placement of this ring that is a little hard to see in this eye, but this ring coming around here suggests this person holds a bit of stress. And let me rephrase that, has a tendency to holding on to stress. Now, maybe they figured that out years ago. And they've got stress coping techniques that help them just let the stress slide right off. If they have, good for them. If they have not, and they are simply working within their genetic tendencies, then they are going to be internalizing that stress and holding it in, which is going to create health issues along the way. So not only do we need to know what the client's symptoms are and see their eyes, we also then need to find out about them. We need to find out, what are they doing for their health? What is their diet? Do they have an active lifestyle? Are they getting enough sleep? Do they drink good, clean water, or are they drinking coffee and fizzy beverages, right? We need to figure those things out, because with that information, with what we see in the eyes and with what we know about the symptoms, we can then create an effective protocol for them. Is this making sense? Is it making sense? Cannot see the slides. Oh my goodness. My apologies. My apologies. I forgot to share the screen. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that note. So what we'll do is we're going to finish this presentation, and then I'm going to make a note that for those of you who have registered for today, I've taught this topic before. I'm going to also send you a recording from a previous time when we discussed this topic. My apologies. Oh my goodness. I've set my computer up a little bit differently today, and apparently I missed that very important step. So just want to make sure, can you see the slides now? Just a moment. Why is this? Okay, just a second. What, I've done something differently, and it's not the way I used to do it. So that's maybe where we're running into problems. Yes, you can. Okay, so I'm going to go back into here, and we're going to fast forward down. Now I've just changed something. Jenna, can you see the slides still? Can you see me flipping through slides? Yes. I'm so glad you were listening. Thank you so much for your patience. And oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay. There we go. So here we are. We're right here right now. My apologies. I'm glad that you, that the information, Veronica's saying the information is priceless. I was listening. Veronica's one of my students. So we're reinforcing things that she's been learning in class. Jenna, now you can see the images. I will, again, for everybody who pre-registered to be here today, I will make sure that you also get two links, the one to this and the one to a previous edition of this recording, so that you can watch them both or listen to this one mostly, I guess, and see where it goes from there. All right, there we go. Now we can see the images. So here we've got someone, again, where we've got all of these petal shapes in the eye. The old style iridology would say that every one of those was a problem happening right now. And that if we do the right dietary things, if we do the right supplements, all that kind of good stuff, we can dissolve those. We can get rid of them. And also we can get rid of these pigments. Now, I will tell you that is all bad information. You know, when I was first learning the constitutional style, this is going to really date me. The Bill Cardona and Harry Wolf had produced some videotapes, VHS videotapes. I don't know if you're old enough to remember a VHS videotape. I ordered their videotapes. I still have them. I don't have a videotape player, but they are precious, precious to me. And as I watched these videos over and over and over again and made notes and added to my notes and added to my notes and kept building out that knowledge base, I was intrigued. It made so much sense. Again, what the constitutional side is it tells us that these tell us about things that have been passed down through the generations, potential weak links that have been passed down. This is not an accumulation of toxins. This shows us an inherent predisposition to an organ that wants to be out of balance. And depending on where that pigment is sitting, it tells us which organ is going to be impacted by that. Right? And so we've got so much information sitting in one pigment like this. As constitutional iridologists, we know we don't cleanse these pigments out. We look for patterns though. So when we see lots of these, and we don't see very many in this side, but if we saw a whole bunch of these freckling this iris, we would know that the organ that put that pigment there wants to have a global impact on the entire body, right? So rather than working with every organ that's being impacted, we go to the organ that is originating the imbalances. This is never going to go away, and we're always going to need to babysit this organ, but we can do that quite easily through food choices, through lifestyle, possibly through some supplements if necessary. Now, this person specifically, with the way the fibers are laying in the eye, might have some issues with connective tissues. They might be more prone to strains and sprains and breaks, and indeed she does. She tends to have knees that don't like her very well. She's young, she's in her mid-20s, and even at that, she has to be a little bit careful with what she does physically because her knees can really struggle with it. This eye also tells us her liver wants to run the show, and that her immune system might not be the best. So when we see all those things, again, we need to listen to the client as the client tells us what their symptoms are, what they want our help with, so that we can understand what we're seeing in the eye and which markings do we need to pay attention to in the here and the now. Our goal is never to change the eyes, because that's just not going to happen. Our goal is to improve the health, right? So iridology allows us to see where the potential challenges are, and it allows us then to teach our client about how their body is put together and how it wants to function. And from there, we can then teach our client how to maintain good health. So important. So again, depending on this client's symptoms and the things that we're seeing, we probably want to do some digestive support and to make sure she's getting enough good quality protein. Probably want her to do some resistance training to strengthen her muscles and her tendons and her ligaments. But we want her to do that under supervision, at least for a while, maybe work with a personal trainer periodically, off and on. We need to get her some good clean water every day to support the kidneys so they can flush extra acid out of the body. I mean, there's just so many things that we could recommend. We're not going to recommend everything all at once, because what we're recommending here are not things that we want them to do for 2 weeks. We want them to implement these things for the rest of their life. Oh, here's a beautiful brown eye. So in the old school iridology, we would have said this person is either heading into a nervous breakdown or coming out of a nervous breakdown. We would have said this person has parasites all over in their body. And I mean, that's enough to just about shut anybody down, right? Just not great information. We would have said this person is hardening their arteries And this is a person who's in her 30s, right? Constitutional teaches us to look at the body of the whole in the context of the owner, not as just random signs that we're seeing in an eye. So again, this is an Asian woman. She's in her mid-30s. When she first started coming to me, her concern was fertility. She and her husband had been trying for 3 years to get pregnant. They'd been to the fertility clinic, and the fertility clinic had that's going to be judgmental. I've got to take a step back from that comment. The fertility clinic had simply said, take metformin and Clomid. Now, she was not an overweight woman. She was actually a very petite woman. They'd given her no dietary recommendations. They'd given her no information about wellness, just take metformin and take Clomid. Well, you probably know metformin is the oral insulin, and Clomid, you can only do 3 rounds of that. After that, it significantly increases your risk of cancer, right? She'd already done 2 by the time she came to see me. So, I looked at this, I'm going, these tell me she internalizes her stress. Not that she's headed into a nervous breakdown, but she internalizes her stress. And she probably burns through her B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium very quickly. I know because of her eye color that she likely does not methylate her B vitamins very well, her folic acid and her B12. And she was using just a cheapo, I think she was using actually prenatal gummies, disgustingly low value, not worth taking, poor quality. All right. And so, and then we see this, and it tells us that her liver likely doesn't handle carbohydrates well, and it can send them either into triglycerides, cholesterol, or blood sugar imbalances, because liver and pancreas have to talk together, right, in order to keep the blood sugars balanced. So as we're talking, I asked her, about, tell me about your diet. Did they work with diet? No diet. Oh, did they suggest anything? And notice how I choose my words here. Did they maybe suggest that you might be flirting with insulin resistance? I mean, they gave you metformin. That would be a common thing. Oh yeah, they said I'm type 2 diabetic. Oh, okay. And with that, did they make any suggestion that you might have polycystic ovarian syndrome? She said, oh yeah, and that's why they gave me Clomid. Her menstrual cycles were 90 days apart. And Clomid or not, you're not going to get pregnant on a 90-day cycle. It's not possible. That's an infertile cycle. Even if you ovulate, it's an infertile cycle. And so, we've finally arrived at she's got PCOS, and her eyes give me clues that she has PCOS. She also has radial furrows in both eyes that are reaching down into the ovary area, right? So that tells me that the nerve feed and nutrition to and garbage removal from the ovaries is likely going to be a little bit compromised. Not parasites, okay? So we did all kinds of work with her. We did, she had some indications as well of a yeast infection. So we did an anti-yeast program, which is great because that's a really great program for type 2 diabetes as well, for regulating blood sugars. At least the program I use is. And we got her onto a really good methylated B vitamin, prenatal vitamin, and we built out her program over several months. It took us a few months. We got her menstrual cycles down to about 32 to 35 days. Now we're talking fertile. It took us 18 months from the first appointment for them to have a positive pregnancy test. But they did get it, and they have a beautiful little boy. He would be a toddler by now. I think he's probably 3 years old by now. But I wouldn't have known to go after the methylated B vitamins particularly, and to use supplements to help the liver manage the carbohydrates better, and to do the specific diet recommendations if I didn't have the eye. I would have just been grabbing at different ideas that I knew had worked for other people. This way, we were able to custom build her program. So some other things with this, old school says we can monitor changes in the eyes, and we've kind of talked about this. These are the same eye, taken roughly 23 years apart. Notice different cameras. Right there, we invalidate the idea that we've got a before and after photo. This is an incandescent flash. This is a scan of a photograph. This is an LED flash, so yellow light, blue light. This is a digital image, a 24 megapixel digital image, right? The color difference, look at the skin, look at the sclera. Those are absolute giveaways that we can't use this as a before and after. So we need to remember we cannot use iridology and the irides to monitor progress. But notice that we do see that pigment has accumulated. When he was 42, we don't have pigment down here, but as he's getting older, we've got pigment setting in. Gives us more information about how his body is aging, right? Really important that irides don't even change fast, right? It's taken 20 odd years to get that pigment set in there. Another indication that irides don't change, these are my eyes from when I broke my arm. Now notice we've got some different settings, some different things going on here with lighting. I'm going to excuse the errors that I committed here because this is 2017. I got a new camera. I was playing with it, new lighting, and everything is looking great. March 2019, I fell on some ice. I broke my wrist in 2 places. This on a Jensen map is the area of the arm. Notice there's no black line, no black line. Okay. I'm thinking I was pretty smart. This is like 3 days post-surgery, still kind of feeling pukey from the anesthetic, right? Well, 2 years later, 10 weeks later, I know my timing, I fell down some stairs and I broke the same arm. I broke the olecranon. Notice we still don't see anything in the eye, but also notice things do look a little different. Like I did not have the presence of mind here to double check my settings. I was just using whatever settings the camera was on, right? And then even looking a few months later, we still have the exact same line structure. The arm healed up nicely, full use, doing beautifully, no problems. And so there's no healing lines in there. There's no sign of a break in the eye, right? So we need to be aware of that. Just dispelling a myth here. Pigments, toxins, pigments equal toxins? Can you cleanse them out? No, you cannot. These are my husband's eyes, actually. And I am constantly giving him different supplements and modifying our diet and doing all kinds of things. And those pigments are not budging. We cannot cleanse them out. This is a quote from Harry Wolff. In fact, it's bogus and a dogma only found among some holdouts from the Lindlar, Kritzer, and Jensen schools of thought. The notion that certain metals, minerals, toxins routinely show up as diagnostic indicators in the iris has long been refuted and proven unreliable. There is no evidence to support the notion that heavy metal toxicity is measurable in the iris, likewise drugs, candida, etc. The dark spots are genetically predetermined, so pigment spots are genetically predetermined, as is the overall color scheme. How about you can make lacunae disappear? Well, no, you can't. Not with anything. So I want you to look right in here. So this is the same eye taken on the same day with this different camera. I'd gotten a new lighting system and we were doing before and afters. Well, not before and afters. We were comparing how do the lighting systems alter the output, right? So notice right here and notice right here. You don't grow lacunae. They're either there or they're not. These look fat because the iris is large, and that then makes the pupil is large, and that compresses the iris tissue. Imagine that you've got a long, skinny balloon, which is what we've got here. If we squeeze on the ends of the balloon, it's going to get fatter, which is what we've done here. We've squeezed on the ends of the lacunae, so it looks fatter, right? We have not, absolutely have not changed those lacunae in any way, shape, or form. We didn't make them bigger. We didn't make them smaller. This is a photographic technology question. Does that make sense? Does the idea of iris getting larger or pupil getting larger, compressing iris tissue, altering how the fibers appear to be sitting. Does that make sense? Give me a make sense in the comments box if that's working for you. Parasites, again, Jensenians will call these parasite lines. They are not parasite lines. They do teach us that there is an interruption in the nerve feed, that there's also a potential for holding toxins there. And so we just need to be aware of these do not guarantee parasites. Okay. Again, from Harry Wolff, American sources from the turn of the 20th century are very unreliable, repetitive, and very misleading with silly and debunked notions like drug spots, psoriatic itch spots, healing lines, parasite lines, and brown eyes turn blue with detox. So which iridology chart is correct? That is a really good question. You'll see a lot of maps out there, and depending on your purposes will determine which map you're going to use. If you want to do iridology at a clinical level, what you really want is a simple chart that is not bogged down with all kinds of extraneous information. By that, I mean, you'll see on a lot of charts that it talks about the ear or the hand or the leg, you know, and so those are not metabolically active, right? The hand, unless there's cancer in the hand, is not going to affect the rest of the body, right? However, the brain will, and the lung will, and the kidneys will. And so when we're doing iridology as constitutionalists, we want to use a simple map like this that lets us see clearly where the organs are, so we can start connecting symptoms and markings to understand what the body is capable of. There may be times when we need to go to a more detailed map, like a Jensen map, but that's not very often at all. Now, I am going to post a link in the chat box, just in case you want to download this map. Okay, so there's a link there for you to hop on over and download that. You might want to take a minute and do that right now. Extra question, is brown pigment in a blue eye an indication of toxicity? Is yellow pigment an indication of sulfur buildup? We've already kind of covered that. The answer is absolutely not. This is not the eye of someone who is toxic and needs to cleanse. We can't determine that until we know their symptoms, their diet, their lifestyle. Very simple. Another extra question, is white in a blue iris an indication of stagnation, of scarring or stagnant lymph? Well, the first part of the question suggests that the irides will change based on what's happening in the body, like, you know, a surgery or an injury. So the answer to that is absolutely not. The white does not show up as a result of scarring. White clouds, again, don't even suggest absolutely stagnant lymph. They suggest, when we see white clouds, like we've got some white clouding under here, they suggest a predisposition towards the lymphatics wanting to be stagnant. But again, if we don't know diet, if we don't know lifestyle, we don't know if the lymphatics are stagnant. So the unequivocal answer is no. No, white in a blue iris is not an indication of scarring or of stagnant lymph. They're an indication of predisposition towards stagnant lymph or over acid situations in the body, but we need to talk with our client to know more. Some people will say you can learn everything you need to know about iridology from books and YouTube videos. So if by everything you mean that one mark is one problem, then yeah, you can learn it on that very shallow level, that party game version of iridology. Absolutely, have at it. If, on the other hand, you want to learn iridology at a professional level, one that teaches you to think through an iris assessment quickly and accurately, one that teaches you how iris indicators work together to flesh out the story and the understanding, then you're never going to learn it all from books and videos. To learn iridology at that level requires a teacher who will mentor you and coach you and give you the benefit of years of experience. So here's the deal. We already know that only licensed medical professionals are allowed to practice iridology, or are allowed to practice diagnoses rather. Thank goodness they're not the exclusive owners of iridology. But even so, as iridologists, we don't diagnose. That is the medical wheelhouse, not our wheelhouse. But, as a Jensenian, I was diagnosing all the time because I was taught that's how you did it. But again, I was often wrong. With constitutional, I am right so much more of the time. I'm able to hit the ideas that my client needs to hear accurately, precisely, first time around. Bill Cardona said this: iridology cannot be used to diagnose. It is a unique assessment tool to gain understanding of the blueprint of the body, including tendencies towards illness patterns or assessment of resiliency and resistance against negative influences. But diagnosing in the presence or status of illness or disease is never appropriate. So important. I've got some questions for you now. And these are questions that you would probably want to ask me. How long does it take to learn iridology? Well, if you consider how long it takes to learn traditional Chinese medicine pulse diagnosis, right? That takes years. Iridology takes time as well. Maybe not years, but certainly when I teach iridology, you come to me with an anatomy and physiology course already under your belt. We teach it over the course of 20 weeks. And then there's the mentoring for certification process that's included with the course. And we prepare you to become certified, should you decide you want to be certified. Can you earn a living with iridology by itself? The answer is no. You have to have a modality. Having only iridology without having herbology or nutrition or physical therapy or aromatherapy or something to back it up is like taking your car to a mechanic's garage. They look at it, they say, yeah, we know what the problem is, but we don't fix cars here. You have to go to Jim down the street. Your clients want you to do the assessment and to give them suggestions as to what they can do with it. So you need to have a modality as well. I found a course that is taught from books and videos. Is that good enough? Nope, because you'll never learn all the nuances from books and videos. You want to have a live teacher, an interactive teacher, someone who can help guide you through the process and help you learn the process, learn how to think through an eye. And a book or a video is never going to do that for you. So the dynamic iridology assessment system is a course for practitioners, holistic professionals who want to add iridology to their scope of practice. They want to save time in their assessment. They want to get their protocols developed while they're with their client. They want to be able to develop the protocols in step-by-step logical sequencing to encourage clients to be compliant, to help them change their lifestyle, to help them get the results they're looking for, and to engender trust here, long-term retention. I've got clients that have been with me for 4 decades. It's pretty fun having clients that have been with me since the beginning. They stuck with me through my Jensen years. I bless them for that. So if you've got a college level A&P under your belt, fantastic, that's anatomy and physiology course, then we need to have a chat. And in order to do that, so if you want to learn iridology at that professional level, and you've got that college level anatomy and physiology under your belt, I've just posted the link in the chat box. We need to have a little one-on-one chat. We need to just make sure what your goals are, where you want to go with iridology, what you want iridology to do in the scope of your professional practice. We need to figure out if you and I can work well together, right? Are we a good energy fit? I'm not interested in your tuition if the course is not a good fit for you. And so we need to have that one-on-one meeting so we can talk, so we can vet each other, so we can make sure this is a good thing to do. Not a high pressure sales call, simply an opportunity for you to tour the campus and meet the instructor to decide if this will work for you. Again, open to people who've got the A&P. If you don't have anatomy and physiology, let me know. I can send you a link to the course that I send my students to as the prerequisite. They get that out of the way before they come to me, and let's get you on the path to getting ready to learn iridology. Mike Knapp is a naturopath in Arizona. I asked him, why did you take my course? He said, the interactive online platform with an experienced teacher and practitioner. You said the fundamentals of iridology could be learned in this format, and that's what was delivered, plus a lot more on how to integrate it directly into current practice. I'm very happy with the training, so thank you. So that was great. And then he was working on integrating it. So there we have it. There we go. Again, the next course starts on June 27th. If you've got the A and P and you want to talk about the course, get more information, use that link that I sent you, iridology.education/about-iridology. Nope. Sorry, that was for the map. tinyurl.com/dynamic-iridology. Let's book a time to talk and let's see if this is a good fit for you. Thank you so much for being with me today. I'll get these replays out to you in the morning. Take good care. Have a great day. Bye for now.